It was an ordinary day on Earth, or so it seemed, until the sky above the Pacific Ocean cracked open like 1,000 mirrors. A massive ship, darker than the night itself, descended slowly, casting a shadow over the sea. The world watched in awe as it touched down with an almost eerie silence. The alien ship had arrived. At first, no one knew what to expect. The last few decades had been filled with rumors, sightings, and even whispers of extraterrestrial life, but nothing that could be trusted. Humanity had always been a curious species, looking up at the stars, wondering what lay beyond. Now that curiosity was about to be answered. From the bow of the ship, a ramp descended, and there she stood, the mistress, towering over any human she encountered. She was unlike anything seen before. Her skin shimmered with a silver hue that seemed to move with the light. Her eyes, large and glowing, flickered like distant stars, searching the crowd that had gathered below. She wore no armor, no weapons, just an aura of power that radiated from her being. The first human to speak was Captain Leah Madison, the leader of a nearby military base. She had always prided herself on staying calm under pressure, but this was different. Standing on the edge of the crowd, Leah looked up at the alien, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Was this a dream? A nightmare? The mistress looked down at the humans, her eyes scanning them with an intensity that felt like she was examining each individual's very soul. There was no hostility in her gaze, but there was something unsettling about her presence. She was not here to make friends. With a voice like the soft hum of a distant song, the mistress spoke in perfect English, though her words had an alien rhythm. I have come for the one who will prove worthy of my desires, one human to serve, to show me the strength, the resilience, the heart of Earth's greatest warrior. I will not tolerate weakness. Leah's heart pounded. The words were not a threat, but a challenge. She had been through battles, negotiations, and standoffs with alien forces before, but nothing like this. This was a test of humanity's pride. The mistress paused, looking over the group of soldiers and civilians who had gathered. She wasn't looking for a fighter, though. She was looking for something else, something deeper. Her gaze settled on a man standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching the proceedings with curiosity but no fear. His name was Marcus, a simple engineer, a man without any military rank, but someone who possessed a quiet strength. Marcus had been trained in the sciences, not combat. He was not the obvious choice, and yet the mistress seemed to recognize something in him that no one else did. She turned her head towards him, her eyes narrowing slightly. The air around them seemed to hum as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Come forward, she commanded, her voice not loud, but filled with a force that made the ground tremble. Marcus didn't hesitate. He walked forward slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone on him. His heart raced, but he kept his head high. What was this about? Why him? He had no special training, no hidden talents. He was just a man who fixed things, but there was no turning back now. As he stepped forward, the mistress observed him with an unreadable expression. You have no rank, no title, but you are different from the others. You will do, she said, her voice cold and calculating. Your kind has no place in my world. But I see potential in you, human. Show me what you are made of. Marcus didn't know what to say. Was this some kind of elaborate test? Did she want him to fight her? He couldn't even imagine what kind of combat skills she possessed. But instead of drawing a weapon, the mistress raised a hand, and a strange device appeared in her palm. It was glowing with an otherworldly light, a weapon or tool. He couldn't tell. Before Marcus could react, the mistress spoke again. The world you know is weak. Your species is fragile, and your leaders have squandered your potential. I will give you a chance to prove your worth. You will travel with me to the heart of my empire. You will show me what it means to be human. The crowd stood still, whispering among themselves, unsure of what was happening. The air felt thick with tension. Marcus, now standing before the mistress, had only one choice: to accept or to resist. But something stirred inside him. This was more than just a challenge. It was an opportunity. An opportunity for humanity to prove to the universe that Earth was more than just a planet to be conquered. It was a place of strength, of untapped potential, and of resilience. Marcus knew he couldn't pass this up. He took a deep breath and nodded, meeting the mistress's eyes. "I will go with you," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. The mistress smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Good. Then you will begin your trial." With that, she raised her hand once more, and the strange device in her palm flared to life. Marcus felt a pull, as if gravity itself was shifting, and before he could react, the world around him began to fade. The ground disappeared beneath his feet, and he was no longer on Earth. The mistress had already begun her trial. Marcus was falling, his body weightless, as if he were drifting through space itself. The sensation lasted only a few moments before the world snapped back into focus. The ground beneath him was solid, and the air smelled strange, cold, metallic, and unfamiliar. He blinked, adjusting his eyes to the dim light. Around him stood towering structures made of dark, smooth metal. The sky above was a swirling mass of colors, unlike anything Earth had ever seen. It was like stepping into a different universe entirely. The mistress stood before him, her gaze as cold and unreadable as ever. She was no longer just an alien in a strange place. She was his judge, and Earth's future, in a way, seemed to rest in the balance of whatever this trial would be. "You are on my homeworld now, human," the mistress said, her voice echoing in the still air. "Here, you will prove your worth, or you will fall. Your kind has no power here. You are nothing." Marcus didn't flinch. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he wasn't about to back down. He wasn't a soldier, but he was determined to represent humanity in whatever way he could. He clenched his fists, steeling himself for whatever challenge awaited him. The mistress stepped aside, her long, flowing silver robes trailing behind her as she gestured to a large structure ahead. It was a massive arena, with strange symbols glowing along its walls. It looked like something from a dream, a place designed for combat, or perhaps for something more. "This is where your trial will take place. You will face the creatures of my world. Defeat them, and you may prove yourself worthy. Fail, and you will never leave this place," she said, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. Marcus swallowed hard. Creatures. What kind of creatures? His mind raced as he tried to prepare himself, but he had no idea what to expect. Still, he couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when everything depended on his ability to represent humanity. "How do I fight?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The mistress gave him a look that suggested she found his question amusing, but there was no kindness in it. "You fight with whatever strength you have, whatever skill you possess, but most importantly, you fight with your mind, the strength of your will. Do not forget that, human." The ground rumbled beneath him, and Marcus took a step back, his heart racing. From the shadows of the arena, strange shapes began to emerge. At first, they were just silhouettes, large, hulking forms moving in the darkness. Then they stepped into the light. The creatures were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. They had the bodies of massive, muscular beasts, but their skin was like smooth black stone. Their eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and their mouths were filled with rows of sharp teeth. They weren't just animals. They were intelligent, designed for battle. And they were coming for him. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his nerves under control. There were 3 of them, no 4, and they were closing in fast. He had no weapons, no training, and no idea how to fight them. But he wasn't going to give up. He remembered what the mistress had said, the strength of your will. His mind raced. He had to think fast. The closest creature lunged, and instinctively, Marcus dodged to the side, barely avoiding its massive claws. His heart was pounding in his chest as he realized that these creatures were far stronger than any human. But he still had his wits, and that was something the mistress couldn't take away. Marcus kept moving, dodging and weaving between the creatures as they tried to corner him. They were fast, but they weren't flawless. Every time one of them made a move, Marcus studied it, looking for any weakness he could exploit. His eyes narrowed as he spotted an opening. One of the creatures was too close, its claws swiping at air as Marcus narrowly avoided another attack. He grabbed a sharp rock that lay nearby, and with a burst of adrenaline, threw it straight at the creature's glowing eye. The rock hit its mark, and the creature screeched in pain, stumbling backward. It was a small victory, but it gave Marcus a glimmer of hope. If he could just keep his mind sharp, maybe he could outsmart them. The mistress watched from her elevated platform, her expression unreadable. Marcus could feel her eyes on him, studying his every move. She wasn't showing any sign of approval or disappointment, just watching, as if waiting for him to fail. But Marcus wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. He wasn't fighting for himself alone. He was fighting for humanity's place in the universe. They couldn't let themselves be conquered, not without a fight. With renewed determination, Marcus used his agility to his advantage, darting in and out of the creature's reach. His mind was working faster than his body, calculating every move before it happened, analyzing their patterns. He had no idea how long he could keep this up, but he couldn't stop now. He kept moving, always staying one step ahead, and gradually, one by one, the creatures began to slow down. They weren't used to facing someone who didn't rely on brute strength. They were used to dominating their prey. Marcus ducked under another swipe from one of the creatures and kicked it in the side, knocking it off balance. The others hesitated, sensing their companion's weakness. They weren't just attacking mindlessly now. They were thinking. The mistress's voice echoed over the arena once more. "Do not forget, human, your strength lies in your will. Prove it." Marcus glanced over his shoulder at her. The creatures were still closing in, but he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. He focused on the remaining 3 creatures. They had underestimated him, and now they were starting to regret it. He would not fail. He would show them just how strong humanity could be. The battle wasn't over yet. The creatures, wounded but still formidable, circled Marcus, their eyes glowing with anger. Marcus was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face as he adjusted his stance. His body ached from the constant movement, but his mind was clear. He could feel the mistress's eyes on him, her presence weighing heavily on his every action. One of the creatures charged again, and Marcus barely had time to react. He ducked, rolling to the side just in time to avoid the sharp claws that slashed through the air where his head had been moments before. His heart pounded in his chest. He was fast, but these creatures were relentless, and he couldn't keep dodging forever. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. What could he do? He wasn't a fighter, but he was a problem solver. He had to think outside the box. The mistress hadn't given him weapons or special powers, only the ability to rely on his own strength, his mind. It wasn't about brute force. It was about surviving long enough to outsmart them. The creature that had charged him earlier was already turning for another attack. But this time, Marcus didn't wait for it to get closer. He spotted a pile of debris near the edge of the arena, scraps of metal, sharp rocks, and twisted beams. They might not be weapons in the traditional sense, but he could use them to his advantage. With a quick glance at the other creatures, Marcus sprinted toward the debris, grabbing a jagged piece of metal and throwing it with all his strength. The sharp metal flew through the air, and one of the creatures howled in pain as it struck its side. It staggered back, its glowing eyes narrowing in fury. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He was doing something. The creatures weren't invincible. They were vulnerable, just like any living thing. He had to keep pressing, keep attacking their weaknesses. The mistress's voice echoed over the arena once again, cold and unwavering. You show promise, human, but you are still not worthy of victory. You have only delayed your defeat." Her words stung, but Marcus ignored them. He couldn't let her get inside his head. He wasn't fighting for her approval. He was fighting for Earth, for the future. He could hear the crowd in the distance, watching with bated breath, waiting to see if the human would fall. The creatures were still circling him, but their movements were less sure now. They had started to grow cautious, sensing that Marcus wasn't as easy to defeat as they had originally believed. He wasn't just a weak human. They had underestimated him. And now they were realizing their mistake. Marcus's eyes darted from one creature to the next. He had to be quick. If he could take down one, the others would lose their confidence. He moved to his left, edging closer to the creature that had been wounded earlier. Its movements were slower now, its posture more defensive. It had taken damage, and that made it more vulnerable. In a flash, Marcus lunged, grabbing another piece of debris and using it like a club to strike at the creature's legs. The creature screeched in pain, stumbling backward. It wasn't finished, but it was off balance. This was his chance. Marcus pressed forward, not giving the creature a moment to recover. With every move, he was learning, adapting, figuring out how to survive. He wasn't fighting with brute strength. He was fighting with strategy, with quick thinking. The mistress watched silently, her eyes narrow. She had expected this trial to be difficult, but the human was proving more resilient than she had anticipated. She wasn't sure whether to be impressed or disappointed. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile, easily broken. Yet, here was one who refused to give up. As the creature tried to recover, Marcus saw his opening. He leaped forward, delivering a final blow to its side. The creature roared in agony and collapsed, unmoving. One down. But Marcus didn't have time to celebrate. The other creatures were closing in, their eyes burning with fury. They wouldn't give him the same chance. They were angry now, and their movements were faster, more coordinated. Marcus turned to face the remaining two. His muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he pushed through it. He couldn't stop now. He wouldn't stop. He had to keep going. The creatures lunged together, moving in perfect sync. Marcus sidestepped just in time, narrowly avoiding their strikes. He couldn't outrun them forever, but he could keep dodging, keep avoiding their attacks, waiting for another chance. The mistress's voice cut through the air. "You are clever, human, but cleverness alone will not be enough." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The mistress was watching, but that didn't matter now. He had already proven something, to her, to the creatures, and to himself. He was more than just a man. He was the last hope for Earth's survival. The two creatures circled him, their eyes locked on his every movement. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. But Marcus wasn't going to make that mistake. He had come too far. He spotted another piece of debris, a long, twisted rod of metal. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He grabbed it and held it in front of him like a spear. The creatures moved in, but Marcus kept his distance, using the rod to keep them at bay. He wasn't a fighter, but he had learned to use what was available to him. The first creature lunged, but Marcus was ready. He thrust the metal rod forward, catching the creature in the side. It howled, but it didn't fall. The other creature took the opportunity to strike from the other side. Marcus twisted, barely managing to avoid the attack. He was running out of options, but he wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. In a final, desperate move, Marcus ducked low, sweeping the legs of the creature with his own. It stumbled, and he quickly used the opportunity to thrust the metal rod straight into its chest. The creature screeched, then fell to the ground, motionless. The arena fell silent. The remaining creature, the last one, backed away slowly, sensing that it was beaten. It turned and fled into the shadows, leaving Marcus standing alone in the arena. He had won. Breathing heavily, his body battered and bruised, Marcus looked up at the mistress. She had said that his will was his strength, and now he had proven it. He had survived the trial. The mistress stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You have earned your victory, human. But this is only the beginning." The arena fell silent, the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing the only noise that filled the air. The mistress stood before him, her glowing eyes unreadable. The creatures that had once surrounded him were no longer a threat. The battle was over, but Marcus knew that the real test had only just begun. The mistress did not speak immediately. She seemed to be considering something, studying him as if he were a puzzle she had yet to figure out. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscles aching, but he stood tall. He had survived this challenge, but what came next? After what felt like an eternity, the mistress finally spoke. "You have proven yourself in battle, human. You are more than just a simple creature, as I once thought. But I will test you further. The true strength of your kind is not in how you fight, but in how you survive." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I've survived your creatures. I've faced your trial." The mistress stepped closer, her presence still as commanding as ever. "You have faced physical strength, but now you will face something different. You will face the harshest of all trials. The trial of your mind." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what the mistress meant. His strength was in his resourcefulness, his quick thinking. But the challenge ahead sounded different. The mistress's eyes glowed brighter as she raised her hand. A small device appeared in her palm, and with a flick of her fingers, the ground beneath Marcus's feet shifted. Suddenly, the world around him changed. The metal arena disappeared, replaced by a vast, desolate landscape. It was a world of stark contrasts. Towering cliffs on one side, a dark, empty sea on the other. The sky was a deep blood-red color, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Marcus's senses were immediately overwhelmed. "You are now on the world of Solara," the mistress's voice echoed in his mind. "Here you will be tested, not by physical force, but by your ability to adapt. You must survive on your own, with nothing but your wits. Do not expect any help from me." Marcus glanced around, taking in the strange, hostile environment. It looked empty, lifeless, but he knew better than to assume there was nothing lurking here. The mistress had given him a challenge, and he was going to face it head-on, just as he had with the creatures. "Survive?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his mind. "How long am I supposed to survive?" The mistress's answer was cold and simple. "For as long as it takes. There are no rules here, only survival." Marcus took a deep breath. He didn't have much of a choice. He could complain, but that wouldn't change anything. His only option was to find a way to survive, just like he always did. He began walking, keeping a wary eye on his surroundings. The landscape was unforgiving. The ground beneath his feet was cracked and dry, and there was no sign of any life. No animals, no plants, nothing. It was like he had been dropped into a world that had been abandoned long ago. His first priority was to find water. He knew he couldn't survive long without it, but the harsh environment gave no hint of where to find it. The mistress had given him nothing but the challenge itself, no tools, no resources. It was up to him to figure it out. Marcus continued his journey, his mind working quickly. He knew the basics of survival: how to find shelter, how to ration food and water, how to avoid dangers. But this world was different. It was alien, and that made everything more difficult. As the hours passed, Marcus began to grow desperate. The sun, which was now setting, cast long shadows across the barren landscape. He hadn't found any water, and he was beginning to feel the weight of hunger. His stomach growled, but there was no food in sight. He had to keep moving. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the air, like a low, rumbling growl. Marcus froze, his senses on high alert. Was it one of the creatures from the arena, or something else entirely? He scanned the area, his eyes darting from side to side. The sound grew louder, closer. He turned quickly, spotting a movement in the distance. Something was coming toward him, but it wasn't a creature like before. It was a figure, humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and shimmering. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Marcus's heart raced. Was this another test? The mistress had told him to survive, but this was different. This was no creature, no animal. This was something else. The figure drew closer, moving with fluid, almost graceful steps. "Who are you?" Marcus called out, his voice steady but filled with caution. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its hand, and the air around it seemed to shimmer, as if bending to its will. The ground beneath Marcus's feet began to tremble, and he took a step back, instinctively reaching for something, anything to defend himself. But there was nothing. Just his hands, and the knowledge that he had to survive. The figure spoke, its voice soft and musical, but carrying an unsettling weight. "You are far from home, Earthling, but your mind is sharp. Your will is strong. You must make a choice, for survival lies in your hands." Marcus didn't understand. What choice? What was this being? It wasn't a creature. It was something far more mysterious, far more powerful. But it wasn't attacking. It was offering something. What choice? Marcus asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. The figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes fixed on him. "There are many paths to survival. Some are harder than others, but all paths lead to the same place, victory or failure. You must decide, Earthling. What will you do?" Marcus didn't know what to say. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Whatever came next, he knew it would define his future, and perhaps the future of Earth. The mistress had said this trial would test his mind, and now it was clear that the real test wasn't just surviving. It was about the choices he made along the way. The ground beneath Marcus's feet felt solid again, but it wasn't the same. The air was still heavy, thick with the weight of the trials that lay ahead. His heart pounded as he stood in the desolate landscape, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The figure had told him that he passed the first trial, but now Marcus wasn't sure what the next step would be. The surroundings were eerily quiet. The silence pressed in on him like a physical force. The sky above was an unnatural red, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. There was no sign of life, no creatures or even plants. Yet Marcus felt an unmistakable presence, like the world itself was watching him, waiting. He had made his choice. He had chosen to fight for Earth, for humanity's future. But now he had to continue. The mistress would not give him an easy path. She had made that clear from the start. This was only the beginning. Marcus took a deep breath and started walking again. His muscles still ached from the battle with the creatures, but he couldn't afford to rest. He had survived so far by staying sharp, by thinking quickly, and that's what he needed to do now. As he moved through the barren landscape, he began to notice something strange. There were no landmarks, no defining features. But the ground beneath him seemed to shift subtly with every step, as if guiding him toward something. The path ahead was unclear, but Marcus knew he had to keep moving forward. The mistress had set these trials, and he couldn't stop now. Not when Earth was depending on him. Hours passed, and still nothing had changed. The silence stretched on, and the weight of the air grew heavier. The feeling of being watched never left him, but there were no signs of the figure or any other beings. Marcus felt as though he were alone, trapped in a vast void, with nothing but the red sky and the endless ground. Then, without warning, the ground shifted again. The earth trembled beneath his feet, and Marcus stumbled, barely keeping his balance. He looked around, expecting to see something or someone, but there was nothing. The tremor subsided, and the ground settled, as if nothing had happened. Marcus hesitated. Was this another trial? Had the mistress sent something to test him? He stayed alert, watching for any signs of danger, but the stillness returned. He continued walking, the feeling of unease never quite leaving him. The silence was maddening, and the longer he moved through the barren landscape, the more he began to wonder if this was the mistress's test, to make him question his purpose, to see how long he could endure the isolation. Just as his thoughts began to spiral, he saw something in the distance. A dark shadow loomed ahead, an odd shape that stood out against the endless emptiness. It wasn't much, just a silhouette against the red sky, but it was something. And Marcus knew that whatever it was important. With renewed determination, Marcus made his way toward the shadow. As he got closer, the shape began to take form, a structure of some kind. It was a tall, imposing tower made of black stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. The tower was surrounded by a thick fog that hung in the air like a shroud, obscuring the view. Marcus approached cautiously, his senses alert. The tower looked ancient, its surface weathered and cracked, as if it had stood for centuries. It was an odd sight in a world that seemed so desolate. But the mistress had spoken of trials of the mind, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder if this tower held the next challenge. He stepped into the fog, and as soon as he did, the air seemed to change. It was colder, sharper, and the sound of his footsteps echoed unnervingly loud in the quiet. The fog thickened around him, and he could barely see a few feet ahead. He kept walking, though, trusting his instincts. The tower was his destination. He had to reach it. The fog seemed to grow heavier with every step, and the path forward became more and more uncertain. Marcus felt as if the air itself was pressing in on him, making it harder to breathe. But still, he pushed forward, knowing that turning back was not an option. Then, something changed. A soft voice echoed through the fog, and Marcus froze in his tracks. It was familiar, but he couldn't place it at first. Marcus. He stiffened. The voice was calm, gentle, yet it sent a chill down his spine. It called his name again, and this time he recognized it. It was the mistress's voice. "Why do you continue?" the voice asked, almost sounding like it was coming from everywhere at once. "You have survived the first trial, but what is it you seek? What is your true purpose?" Marcus's mind raced. The question was simple, but it dug deep into his thoughts. What was his purpose? Why was he doing this? The mistress had said it was a trial of the mind, but the answer seemed more elusive now than ever before. "I fight for Earth," Marcus said, his voice steady but unsure. "I fight because humanity deserves to survive. We can adapt. We can overcome anything." The voice was silent for a moment, and Marcus felt the weight of his words hanging in the air. He had said what he believed, but the doubt was still there. Was it enough? Suddenly, the fog began to clear, and before him, the tower loomed even larger. The stone walls shimmered, and the entrance appeared, a dark archway leading inside. Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure of what awaited him within, but then he stepped forward. He had come this far, and he couldn't turn back now. The moment he entered the tower, the door slammed shut behind him, and the room was plunged into darkness. He reached out, his hands brushing against the cold stone walls, and felt a shiver run through him. There was no turning back now. A soft glow appeared ahead of him, illuminating the room. Marcus followed the light, his footsteps echoing as he moved deeper into the tower. He didn't know what the mistress had planned for him next, but he was ready. This was his trial, and he would face it head-on, just as he had faced everything else. The air inside the tower was thick with silence. Marcus's footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the darkened hallway, the faint glow from ahead guiding his path. The walls around him were cold, made of the same black stone that seemed to absorb all light. He couldn't see what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. The mistress's trial was far from over. He moved carefully, every sense on high alert. His breath came in slow, steady rhythms, but his mind raced. What was this tower? What would he face within its walls? He had faced the creatures of the mistress's world, and he had passed the first mental challenge. But this felt different. It was as though the very air around him was charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. The soft glow ahead began to grow brighter, illuminating the path before him. As he rounded a corner, the hallway opened up into a large chamber. The room was vast, its ceiling stretching high above him. And at the far end of the chamber stood a single pedestal, bathed in light. Atop the pedestal was a strange object, its shape obscured by a shimmer in the air. Marcus approached cautiously, his instincts telling him that this was it. This was the next test. The moment his foot crossed the threshold into the chamber, the ground beneath him shifted. The doors he had just passed through slammed shut, and the room was suddenly filled with a deep, resonating hum. "Welcome to the second trial, Earthling." The mistress's voice echoed through the room. It was no longer the calm, distant voice from earlier. Now it was sharp and commanding, filling every corner of the chamber. "This trial will test your will. It will show whether you truly understand the cost of survival." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He stood in the center of the room, unsure of what would come next. The object on the pedestal seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive, but he couldn't understand its purpose. "You have fought physical challenges," the mistress continued, her voice surrounding him. "You have faced the trial of the mind. Now you must face the trial of the spirit. You will be given a choice, and that choice will define who you are. Choose wisely." The air grew heavy again, and Marcus's thoughts began to race. A choice. What choice was he supposed to make? He had come this far, but now the stakes seemed higher. The mistress was testing him in ways he didn't fully understand. He moved closer to the pedestal, each step feeling more difficult than the last. The closer he got, the more the room seemed to press in on him. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, as if the space was shrinking with every passing second. Finally, he stood before the pedestal, and the object on top of it became clearer. It was a small crystalline orb, glowing with an ethereal blue light. The light seemed to pulse, growing stronger as Marcus reached out to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a sharp jolt of energy shot through his body, and the room around him shifted once more. In an instant, he was no longer in the tower. The chamber had disappeared, replaced by a vast, open field under a sky so blue it felt unnatural. The grass beneath his feet was soft, and the air smelled fresh, clean, as though he had just stepped into a dream. But there was something wrong. The field stretched out endlessly, the horizon just a blur in the distance, and standing before him, just a few feet away, was another version of himself. This other Marcus was dressed in the same clothes, his expression identical, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a bitterness. This version of himself didn't look like someone who had fought for survival. He looked like someone who had given up. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer before the words left his lips. "I am what you could become," the other Marcus replied, his voice low and filled with regret. "If you choose wrong, if you choose selfishness over the survival of your world." Marcus frowned. This was another part of the trial, he realized. It was not just about his survival. It was about the choices he made and the consequences that followed. The other Marcus raised his hand, and suddenly, Marcus felt a sharp pain in his chest, like something was pulling at him from the inside. The world around him blurred, the grass and sky twisting into shapes that made no sense. He struggled to keep his footing, but the pull was too strong. It felt like his very spirit was being torn apart. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, trying to break free. He had to focus. He had to make the right choice. The other Marcus smiled cruelly. "You think you can stop this? This is the price of survival. This is the cost of saving your people. You can have all of it: power, control, victory, if you give up everything that makes you human. The choice is yours." Marcus's mind raced. He had been through battles, through trials, but this was different. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about the heart of humanity. The mistress had said that this trial would test his spirit, but now he understood. It wasn't about giving up or giving in. It wasn't about sacrificing his humanity for the greater good. "No," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I won't become like you. I will never give up. I will fight, not just for Earth, but for everything it stands for. I won't lose who I am." The other Marcus's expression faltered for a moment, and then the world around him began to shift again. The sky faded, the grass disappeared, and Marcus was back in the chamber. The pedestal was before him once more, but the orb was no longer glowing. It had gone dark, as if it had lost its power. "You have passed the second trial," the mistress's voice echoed through the room, though it now seemed distant, as though she were no longer watching him so closely. "You have chosen your path. Now you must prepare for the final test." The room around Marcus began to fade, and he found himself standing once again in the desolate landscape, the weight of the trials still pressing down on him. The mistress was right. The trials had tested his will, his heart, and now he had to face whatever came next. He had survived the trials of the tower, but now the final challenge awaited. The ground beneath Marcus's feet was once again solid, but it felt different. He stood in the same barren landscape where his journey had begun, but now everything had changed. The silence that had once felt oppressive now seemed to hum with anticipation, as though the very world was holding its breath. Ahead, in the distance, a figure appeared, tall, cloaked in dark robes. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had seen this figure before, though not like this. The mistress had appeared to him in many forms, but this was different. She was here, in person, at the end of it all. "Welcome, Earthling." The mistress's voice rang out, low and powerful. "You have come far. You have survived trials of the body, the mind, and the spirit. Now, the final trial awaits, and it is the most difficult of all." Marcus steeled himself. He had come so far, passed so many tests, but now he was facing the true challenge. The mistress had told him that humanity's fate rested in his hands. He couldn't fail now. "What is the final trial?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but his heart pounding. The mistress extended her hand toward him, and as she did, the ground shifted once more. The barren land began to form, changing rapidly. The sky darkened, and the temperature dropped. The harsh winds blew, whipping around him. He had no idea what was happening, but he braced himself, keeping his feet planted firmly. "You will face your greatest fear," the mistress said, her voice echoing through the howling wind. "The fear that lies within every soul. It is the fear of failure, of losing what you cherish most. Your fear will manifest before you. You must face it, and only then can you prove your worth." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Fear, was that it? It was more than just facing some monsters or challenges. It was facing the deepest part of himself, the fear he had buried, the fear that had fueled his drive all along. Suddenly, the wind stopped, the storm around him cleared, and a vision appeared before him, a vision of Earth, burning. The cities were in ruins, crumbled to dust by some unseen force. People ran through the streets, screaming, their faces twisted in terror. The planet itself seemed to crack, as though the very ground beneath them was being torn apart. And in the center of it all, Marcus saw himself, standing, helpless, unable to stop the destruction. His hands were tied, his body immobile, as he watched the world crumble. It was the one thing he had feared all along, failing his people, failing Earth. He stepped forward, trying to reach out, but his legs wouldn't move. His body was frozen, as though the fear itself had paralyzed him. The vision grew clearer, the destruction more vivid, and the weight of it crushed him. "You see," the mistress's voice whispered in his ear, "this is the fear that lies deep within you. This is the fear of loss. The fear that if you fail, you will lose everything. Your home, your people, your purpose. You are weak, just like everyone else. You cannot save them." Marcus gritted his teeth. No, He couldn't let this fear control him. He had come too far. This vision was not the truth. It was a lie. His people were strong, and they deserved a chance to survive. He wasn't the only one who could fight for Earth. With every ounce of willpower, he forced himself to take a step forward. His legs moved slowly, as if the weight of his fear was still trying to hold him back. But he didn't stop. He kept moving, step by step, his heart pounding in his chest. "You cannot win," the mistress's voice taunted, her laughter echoing through the vision. "You are too weak to save them. You will lose everything." Marcus clenched his fists. No, he would not let this be the end. He had chosen to fight for humanity, to fight for Earth's future. The fear of losing that future could not stop him. He had to push forward, no matter what. "You're wrong," Marcus said, his voice rising against the storm of his fear. "I will not give in to you. I will fight until the end. Earth will survive, and I will make sure of it." As the words left his mouth, the vision around him began to shift. The destruction faded, the people's screams grew quieter, and the sense of helplessness that had gripped him started to loosen. The world before him began to change, the image of Earth flickering like a broken screen. The mistress's laughter faded into silence. And then, the vision vanished completely. Marcus stood alone in the empty landscape once more. The sky above was clear, the winds calm, and the earth beneath him felt solid again. But he knew the trial was not over yet. "You have faced your fear, Earthling," the mistress's voice said, now calm and almost respectful. "You have conquered the doubt within yourself. You are ready." Suddenly, the ground beneath Marcus's feet cracked open, revealing a bright light beneath the surface. The light was warm, pulsing with energy, as if it were alive. The mistress's figure appeared before him once more, her presence now filled with a sense of finality. "You have proven yourself worthy," she said, her tone almost admiring. "Your trials are complete. Earth has a chance. But remember, this is only the beginning. What happens next depends on what you do with the power you've gained. Do not squander it." The ground trembled one last time, and Marcus felt the light surge through him, filling him with strength and purpose. He was no longer the man who had walked into the mistress's trials. He was someone different now, someone stronger, someone ready to lead. "You are ready to return," the mistress said, her voice now softer, almost kind. "Go, fight for your world. The future is yours to shape." With those words, the landscape around him began to shift once more. The barren world melted away, replaced by the familiar sights of Earth. The battle was far from over, but Marcus was no longer afraid. He had faced his fears, and he was ready for whatever lay ahead. The final trial had been conquered, and the future of Earth rested in his hands.